the panic really came in because the rubber started to hit the road, right? When you open up a self-distribution center, you assume responsibility for that inventory risk. And to Scott's point, I wasn't just assuming that risk for Trinity. Medtronic's name's on the box. So they want to make sure that I'm going to live to that promise, that that product is always going to be there like it has been out of the sales rep's trunk.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we are going to be talking success stories in supplier and provider partnerships. There's a collaboration coming up next. We're going to be talking to Ed Hisscock, Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Management at Trinity Health, and Scott Wilson, Program Director, America's Supply Chain with Medtronic and Hayes. I know you've known Ed for a while. This is not a small scale project. This is not an easy one. But it is an obvious one if you talk to Ed and Scott. And once they really boiled it down to the mission, they were able to get it done. And they're going to tell us all about it today.
100%. And I tell you, we've been talking about doing these things for decades in healthcare. Well, Ed and Scott figured it out and they have done it very successfully. So you need to come and listen, learn how they do it, and perhaps you can implement this at your hospital. So stick around.
All right. We're going to be right back with Ed and Scott.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now on Power Supply is Ed Hisscock, Senior Vice President, Supply Chain Management at Trinity Health, and Scott Wilson, Program Director, America's Supply Chain at Medtronic. And we are going to be highlighting a success story for all of you out there, a creative collaboration between provider and supplier that hopefully will inspire many others to look at how they work together out there in the industry, connecting two supply chain experts together and bringing them on this show. So fantastic. Ed, nice to talk to you again. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
Ed, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Oh, Lord. So I've been at this a minute. I'm probably creeping up on 30 years practicing in our healthcare supply chain in one form or another. I probably served just about every venue and every discipline that one might in healthcare supply chain. I've been on the supplier side, the provider side. I've been a consultant. I started a tech company, sold that, started a consultancy, sold that. So have worn a lot of hats and have been blessed with just a wonderful career in an industry that I've come to love.
Well, you and I connected because you were a guest on one of the first episodes of the AHRMM SME monthly podcast series. Mike Schiller connected us and you were saying, I'm trying to tell everybody about this. And of course, we gave a high level overview of some self-distribution, I'd say success stories that you'd had, but you were alluding to this one. And then we talked about maybe we should have a more in-depth conversation about it. You were like, well, let me see if I can get Scott to come on and we can tell both sides of the story. And so, Scott, I want to welcome you to the show and maybe you can introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. Yeah, like Ed, this summer will be 27 years at Medtronic. I never thought I would stay anywhere at that long, but it's been a great ride. I spent the first 20 in the spine business. Grew up with them. I was responsible for that monster loaner program. trying to make it spin and come back and be available for other surgeries. Try to keep the salespeople up for making that thing circulate. And then about 7 years ago, I moved over to distribution and supply chain and kind of was asked to go out and talk to customers. And so started going out whenever they wanted to speak to supply chain, try to figure out what they were interested in, how we could deliver better, faster, and more efficiently, and, and serve more patients. So, and the rest is kind of history.
Well, Scott, I'm happy that you're here. Obviously, having a fellow Tennessean in the room is always nice. And years ago, I did a sales internship back in the day, and I spent 1 week in the loaner department in Warsaw. And let me tell you, that was an eye-opening experience back in the day, particularly. That was like in, I guess, early 90s. And to see the amount of inventory that was coming in and out, it was eye-opening. So I can only imagine what you saw and dealt with.
Yes. It was an awesome experience. Scary at the time, but in hindsight, what a great place to grow.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Justin, did Hayes say the 1960s is when he saw that? I can't remember.
We weren't doing a lot of joints in the early 60s, you know.
Well, now I get why Justin opened up and asked me to introduce myself, because had Hayes or Scott done it, each letter in my name would have got its own syllable. It would have been A.
That's exactly right, Ed.
And that was awesome.
My wife is from Memphis, and she can take my name Hayes with 4 letters and make it sound about 15. So I know what you're talking about, Ed. If she was here, she'd probably bring it in. But
Well, we titled this episode The Last Mile, and we're going to be focusing on self-distribution and this success story for some pretty significant savings from operational efficiencies in the way that the two of you partnered together. But the last mile, not to be confused with the green mile, is really the moral of this story. And you were kind of talking about that, Ed, as we were developing the outline with Scott. When we're talking about the last mile, let's talk about the end in mind, and then we'll lead into the full conversation. But when we're talking about the last mile, where was this operational efficiency? What is in that last mile?
Yeah, so it manifests, and the results came from the last mile. And actually, you could argue no, it's all the last mile, right? So it's really getting that product in the most efficient way to the procedural area in this circumstance. We're talking about CRM devices in particular. So it's about getting that product in the most efficient way, ultimately from where it's made, right, all the way to that procedural area into the patient. But where Scott and I had an ability to influence the trade relationship was really in that last mile, and what that order looks like getting into the facility and into the procedure room to care for a patient.
So let's kind of talk about self-distribution now. Like, we've characterized the last mile, but in the self-distribution model, I'm assuming, the service center or the centralized location is what begins that last mile, right? It's the entry point to that final mile. But for people out there, what does self-distribution mean for all the different stakeholders? Not necessarily a definition, but what does it mean for the manufacturer in this scenario? What does it mean for healthcare? And ultimately, maybe you could set the table for how both of your organizations were able to win from this collaboration.
Yeah, so I'll start, Scott. And it really is, when we embarked on the self-distribution model at Trinity, what we were looking to do was just put ourselves in a position to have the kind of conversations that Scott and I had. Because if you back up and take a look at our industry and compare it to other industries, we have tremendous waste in our trade relationship with our suppliers. Not for anybody's fault, right? It is just because that's the way we grew up. 6,000 independent hospitals buying from very large organizations in whatever way was advantageous at a point in time. And we've just built these tried, I don't know how true, but these tried,
exactly,
very well practiced legacy practices that, when you stop and think about it, the most costly, the most invasive products that we use in our facilities, implants, typically come out of the trunk of a sales rep. And really, that's the most efficient way we can get product to and from a facility. And then you look to think about self-distribution or distribution in general. The idea there is to create a more efficient way to aggregate demand and deliver in more efficient ways. So it really was, again, I know I'm backing off of that last mile, but to think about the role of a self-distribution center or a distribution center, whether it's self-managed or managed by a third party, that function should serve to take cost out of the trade relationship by helping a manufacturer aggregate demand, ship full truckload ideally, and then have a common low unit of measure pick, pack, and ship operation to the facility itself.
Scott, what would you add? Just from the benefits, I would say, what's in it for the manufacturer in addition to maybe what Ed just mentioned?
Well, our entire industry, our supply chain is probably I'd call it a fear drive. My rep is carrying extra product in his trunk to make sure they never don't service the patient or the procedure. And then within a hospital, everybody doesn't want to tell the doctor that they can't help that patient once they're open. So everybody's got an ace up their sleeve somewhere, and there's extra stuff everywhere. To move to self-distribution, you're talking about going from single riders in a single box overnight all the time to taking a stocking order once a month, handing it to someone, trusting them that they will actually get it into the procedure, because no matter who messed it up, it's got our name on it if it was our product they asked for. So you've got that, the reps have to trust it. You have to be good enough at it to gain that trust of both my reps and also the people that work in the ministries, for them to believe that it's going to come from the warehouse correctly. So you've got all those pieces. And then these are high value products. If a pacemaker that's, over $10,000 dies, it's very painful for the person owning that warehouse because they're holding it at street value. So you really have to be able to track the inventory. These are all serialized parts. And so there's a lot of pieces that you got to pick a good partner to work with, or a partner that will develop those capabilities and be able to do it and do it well.
So how did this all kick off? How did the conversation even start between the two of you?
It actually started, Scott invited us down to his warehouse and then proceeded to, I'll never forget the slide. He proceeded to put a slide up on the overhead that said, here's what Trinity Health looks like at our facility. And, we run around thinking we're the most efficient thing there ever was, right? All of us do. And our procure to pay department, we're so proud of that thing. All these orders flying through, lights out. Well, what that turned into was, what was it, Scott? I think 47 orders a day from Trinity Health showed up at the warehouse. So 47 times a day, somebody would pick that order off the printer, run around the warehouse, pick the product typically, put it in a small box, take it over and put a label on it and put it in the truck, the FedEx truck that sits at the dock. 47 times a day. We were efficient because that order went through lights out. And Scott said, can we at least batch some of these? If they're going to the same ship due, can we batch them? That would save me a couple of trips around the warehouse and a couple of pieces of corrugated and maybe a transportation expense, right?
Yeah, and that was only our vascular product. That was just a portion of it. About 250 orders a week. And that was 1,066 pieces. So, Ed
and Scott, I'm just thinking about the aggregate that you brought up of pummeling together to reduce the amount of coming in. I'm thinking about the end user, the VP of supply chain, looking at that receiving dock, bringing that in less times the OpEx downhill. Oh my gosh, it just keeps going. It just keeps going.
Yeah, because every one of those is a receipt for me. It's an unpacking event. It's carrying it up to the OR, the cath lab, and And you're right. All those shadow costs. So to answer, I guess, your question more specifically, Justin, how did it start? Very dramatically.
He got your attention, didn't he?
So it's like, we now see a problem we can attack here.
Yes.
Well, we talk about transparency all the time in this industry now. And we talk about, what can suppliers do? They need to come to the table. We hear this from the healthcare side all the time. And, Scott, I just commend you for coming up with a way to present that opportunity, in a way that's so succinct and makes sense so that, you were able to move this project forward with Trinity. Because, sometimes it's like we know it, but how do we collate that down to just a really simple message where everybody is like, I get it. Okay, let's work on that. That's not always very easy to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty simple math, but yeah, boiling it down is key to seeing which direction to go. We actually did a test pick of those orders. We said, okay, what if we put them in one order and picked it? And we went from 710 pounds to 600 pounds. And then we reduced the cardboard by 65% because they had been going single passenger in a FedEx or a UPS, small box. And they went from palletizing them, and we went to 2 pallets from 3, about 8 feet high. So it was really, really a dramatic change to be able to ship that consolidated.
This is a real green kind of initiative too. I don't know if even when we talked about it, I don't think we really touched on that, but that's a huge impact on the environment too. When you start talking about orders of that scale, and
it's a lot of waste, but it's also, like I say, if the more gray hair I get, the more likely I'm going to be the patient. So I want you guys to get it there fast on.
Get this right.
It's got to be there.
Less cardboard, less pallets, less pickup, less waste, less pick. I mean, it just keeps streaming down. I see dollars. I'm just running dollars in the back of my mind right now.
But Ed, I totally get it that, there's all these advantages, but your people, I'm assuming, were so used to sitting that order in, and they were getting each box every day. So they felt like, that was overnighted or 2-day or whatever it is. Then all of a sudden, was there a sense of panic or concern that, all right, they're batching all this instead of getting it daily every other day? Now it might take me 9 days to get it, or you know what I'm saying? Was that a concern?
Yeah, it was. The panic really came in because the rubber started to hit the road, right? When you open up a self-distribution center, you assume responsibility for that inventory risk. And to Scott's point, I wasn't just assuming that risk for Trinity. Medtronic's name's on the box. So they want to make sure that I'm going to live to that promise, that product is always going to be there like it has been out of the sales rep's trunk. So we had to earn that trust. And to be honest, right out of the gates, we made some mistakes. We were not as tooled as we needed to be going into this. We didn't have the right level of visibility at the point of use. We made some mistakes, and this is where the trust, I think, and Scott, let me know if you agree, but I think this is where the trust really solidified. We ended up running a Kaizen event. After we'd been at this a couple of weeks, we ran a Kaizen event to kind of peel back, where's this working, where isn't this working? We had our team sequestered for 3 days in a conference room. And some exhausting work, but we came out of that with a very clear picture of where we collectively needed to make improvements. Whether it's how the rep is showing up, whether it's how we're ordering, the lead time, the safety stock we're carrying, where we're carrying that safety stock. And the big thing was really visibility at the point of use of the very specific device. And we tweaked those improvements, and we've been sailing now been 1.5 years, I think, Scott, since that Kaizen event. And it's really just gone extremely well.
It's a good marriage when you think you've only been married 2 when you've been married 5. I was looking at some of the documentation on this thing, and we started in 17.
Yeah, those 3 COVID years don't count. I forget those all the time.
Yeah, those were dog years.
Don't we all?
Hey, Scott, I'd be curious on as it relates to your reps, because I was a rep many, many years ago, and I did have trunk stock out. I had garage stock. All right. But did that change? Do those reps still have, because I can imagine being a rep like, yeah, Ed's team is good, but I don't want to show up to Dr. Jones and not have my product. Did that eliminate that, or how did that work?
Yeah, we didn't do a shotgun start on that. They still kept their trunk stock, and we went through a process where we would actually run sales into the warehouse and then sales to the individual hospitals to see how much leakage we had. Because at first the reps get paid a little bit differently, and then they're not sure if it's going to be there. So we tested both to make sure that we had the channel solid and had other things shut off. But yeah, we are actually earned their trust, and today, it flows pretty much through the warehouse. They only participate in some kind of emergency situation. So we did that. And I wanted to revisit the trust issue of going through that Kaizen event. There's a lot of people that say they're collaborative and are collaborative, or very different numbers of people. After we went through that Kaizen event, a lot of people hang you out at that point. They're like, yeah, well, I guess this is your problem. What are you going to do about it, buddy? But Ed really came in and said, you know what? He was serious about building a real distribution network, and he hired the right people and put the right systems and controls and things in place, and really spent the time and effort and emphasis to come alongside us and build something that we could work with.
I want to piggyback off of that trust piece because, interestingly, both of you have to learn to trust each other in that process before you make such a big move towards a large scale initiative like this. But you both have something to lose, which is the trust of the end users out there delivering the care in the ministries, right? And in that way, the two of you are very aligned. Once you both agreed to move forward, both of you had a lot to lose, if it wasn't successful for those that were performing the procedures on a day in and day out basis. So what I also like about it is once you two decided you trusted each other, both as individuals and as organizations, to do it, from that point on, I feel like you were driven on the same mission, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's just, it kind of gets back to the whole, ultimately we kept the patient in focus, right? It's ultimately about serving that patient. And we all say that, but we always don't think about it very comprehensively. It's not only having that product there, but if we're wasting money to get the product there, we're costing that patient more too. And that's an element of care. And in a not-for-profit health system, every dollar I waste goes into investments that I cannot make for the next patient, right? So the opposite of that is every nickel I take out goes back into better care for the next patient that shows up, right? So it's just incumbent on us. And I think Scott and I just thought about this. It's not only having the product available, but a part of our commitment to the patients that we're serving here is that we need to do this in the most efficient manner possible.
Yeah, do it better today for the patient tomorrow, for sure.
I was just going to say, the other piece of that collaboration piece, when we kind of started that Kaizen event, we had to send my sales guy and his purchasing person out of the room and disqualify price or any other benefit trading as a potential piece of it. So you can just sit down and figure out how you move a box from place to place and do it well. But we did that, and it was funny, but that's where you got to get to collaborate. Absolutely.
Did you have the same KPIs? I mean, we're talking about how you were aligned with the trust ultimately, with the frontline end user, but were you also looking, it sounds to me, but I don't want to make an assumption here, that what you both hope to gain in terms of your key performance metrics on the success of this were in fact the same for both. Is that true? Or Ed, were you looking for a couple of things that maybe didn't apply to Scott as well?
No, I think we went into this a little naive. We thought it'd be easier than it was, but through that Kaizen event, that was really one of the things we did was settle on what are those KPIs. And it is about not only product availability, but it's also about obsolete inventory obsolescence, and it's about the efficiencies that we've talked about here. So we put a set of KPIs together that held us both accountable, and some of them were a little soft, right? So one of the things that we were thinking was, the rep need not be in the procedural area, right? If he or she is not there to carry inventory, but they wanted to be there to pick up cases, add-on cases that might show up. So we made accommodation and said, no, the reps are still welcome to come in as they used to be so that they can pick up those cases. And guess what? That benefits us and the program, because now the cases they're picking up are with a supplier that's lower cost, right? Because we've taken this waste out. So it's interesting when you really roll up the sleeves, like Scott was saying, and get into these discussions, supply chain to supply chain. You just really start to learn a lot about each other. It's been my experience that it's easy to trust when you speak the same, or I should say easier to trust when you speak the same language, right?
Yeah. We figured out very quickly. It was so interesting. Our sales dropped, and it was because we had said, hey, the rep doesn't have to be in there to manage inventory, but they were missing the emergent cases because they weren't there. And then Ed and they were like, oh yeah, this is not something where you're supposed to lose. And also, like you said, that other business is kind of off contract. So
from like conception of the idea to actually implementing, what's the time frame there? How long do all these talks, these discussions, this, flow charting, was it weeks? Was it months?
Scott better answer that one, because I thought we've been working at this 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, it was months. When Ed and them started, this was kind of new, doing self-distribution. And there were some consultants in, and they had some theories, and we kind of had to figure out what was theory and what was reality, where we could figure out how to meet, how to find savings, how to find efficiency. And that took us a little bit, just like he said, they came to Memphis and saw what we were doing, and we looked at what they were doing. So I would say 6-7 months to figure out that we wanted to jump in the pool.
So what did you estimate the savings to be? What did it wind up being? And then I can't believe it, but this interview has moved along quite quickly. We're coming towards the end of time, but what were you kind of looking at there? What were you hoping to get, and what did you end up with?
The premise that I went into this with, and people may argue this, but others have heard me say it, is our SKU characteristics in the healthcare industry are very similar to those in the grocery industry. And I'd argue our demand patterns aren't all that different either. That said, that's another whole podcast or 2 or 10. But,
all right, I got you in queue again.
Yeah. But that said, the grocery industry has built means to get product from where it's made to the consumer, usually on about 18-20 cents of the dollar. SG&A, right? Their SG&A runs about 18-20 cents or 20%. Healthcare runs 35-40%. So my going in premise was that we had 15 or 20 points we can take out of this trade relationship somewhere with investments in systems, investments in processes, distribution centers, etc. So that was a going in premise. That's all we had to go on. And what we did with Scott and his team was just agree, whatever we find, we will share. It wasn't a grab for either one of us. That we went into this, that whatever we find, we will share. And I'd rather not say publicly exactly what we found in our dollars and cents, but, or percentage, but we took I will tell you, we took a real good swing at that 15-20%.
Great. All right. Final kind of question. And Phil, you'll have time to add anything else that you think we might have missed. But what about some best practices? And like, this obviously isn't a one size fits all scenario. Like, we're talking about a certain amount of volume here. Qualify what kind of opportunity this might be for others, and maybe some best practices you pass along from some of those lessons that you learned.
We're looking for somebody that's collaborative. We're also looking for somebody that has the systems to be able to do it. Because the first step is you're trusting them to deliver your goods. So we call it self-distribution, but at the very basics of it, will it get to the patient in time? And are they good collaborative folks to work with, and can we have somebody that we can adjust with as we need to go. The other piece is that, you want to take, I guess, a higher reason for doing this. You do want to keep the patient in focus. For us, you asked about savings. The biggest savings for us is the freight and the shipping. About 36% of the business that we're doing with Ed's warehouse, 36% of the business is going through 2,200 lines. And then we've got about 64% of the business that doesn't go through his distribution center, and that's going through 90,000 lines.
Wow.
So 4,000 lines versus 90,000 lines. So it's very efficient, but not every product lends itself to do it. So you got to pick the right products, right partner, be thoughtful, but it's absolutely doable. But again, you need to think about it. Everybody thinks, we'll just put it on the shelf and it'll be easy to deliver it and we'll all make millions. Not. It's a simple process, but hard to do.
Simple but complex.
For sure. It's not cookie cutter. Yeah, not cookie cutter for sure.
Ed, any other best practices? Yeah.
No, I think Scott's spot on. Like you said, the systems and the collaboration is key. And that's another one of those words we use all the time, right? But that shows up in making differences. Because even if I had the systems like this crazy lights out P2P capability we have, I had to go in and change how I use that system in collaboration with Scott to be able to batch those orders in different ways to drive efficiency. And I use that moment, that dramatic moment I talked about earlier when we were sitting in Scott's conference room there in Memphis, and he showed me how my demand shows up. I've used that with others, and I'd say that's an excellent place to start. Just look at how demand is showing up at the manufacturer or distributor and start there. Because if you can think about changing how that demand is expressed, and it's in most of our control to be able to do that, just that alone will take you from 47 packages to 20 packages. Maybe you won't get all the way to a full truckload once a month, but you can still take a lot out just with a couple of simple tweaks in that one practice.
I love it. That's good.
Yeah. Great job, gentlemen.
Yeah, you got my mind thinking. I'm almost like, I don't even have a question because there's just, you start thinking about the possibilities. And obviously there are a lot of factors in size and those type of things. But again, really, really thoughtful. Well done.
Thanks. Yeah, I was at an IDN summit and was evangelizing a little bit and shared that story about the number of orders we were expressing at Scott's place every day. And one of the reps in the audience had his ops guy sitting with him, and he nudged him and said, what does Trinity's demand look like at our facilities? And he got me after the session, came up and said, you know what? I have my ops guy pull our business with you, and you guys sent us, and I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like 28 orders last week for products from 11 of your sites, and it was only $1,200 worth of business. He's like, I probably spent that in freight to get it to you. So it's like, it's not a hard story, it clicked, and it's like, oh man, that was silly. I'd be more profitable if I just didn't sell Trinity if I didn't fill those orders. Right? So it's just, It's really interesting what's going on out there.
Well, I applaud you both for coming together, doing it. I appreciate you sharing it with everybody here. Again, there's just so many possibilities that are out there, and we cannot continue to do it the way we used to do it, right? There's got to be a shift, and it sounds like that's where y'all are starting to look at. So I applaud you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having us. I appreciate all you guys are doing. I've been listening to the podcast for a while now, and you're bringing a lot of good stuff to light. So very cool. Thank you.
That was Ed Hisscock, Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Management at Trinity Health, and Scott Wilson, Program Director for America's Supply Chain at Medtronic. And honestly, Gary, I think one of the things that really sticks out to me in this collaboration is the fact that a lot of times when we look at consolidation, it's like part of standardization. And in this case, the consolidation is really about cost reduction and efficiencies. And you can kind of say it's tied to line items, but it's about reducing them in a whole different way. I don't know that a lot of folks out there are really looking at this, but I do know that managing trunk stock has been a manufacturer's struggle for a long time for all the reasons that Scott mentioned, just extra inventory. And it's hard to keep track of where is that inventory. So streamlining this, it really is kind of an obvious area, I think, for savings and efficiency, but not necessarily obvious in how you might pull it off.
Yeah, I think the way we have done it in the past is the point they're bringing up is we've got to change, we've got to collaborate, we've got a partnership. It's a transformation of looking at the logistics piece, not only from the end users on the healthcare side, starting with the VP of supply chain and the downstream effect it has on some labor costs and some savings and the time to touch everything as it comes in, but also from the distribution side on the vendor side. So it's almost like a shared savings model. It's almost like they're supporting each other, and it's a win-win on both sides. But having that trust to build that may take a little bit of time, as they pointed out, but just moving forward, it's the best thing for the mission and for the patients.
Another interesting kind of point that I don't think we focused on in the interview, but was mentioned. You hear a lot of talk about the repless model, and there's a lot of vendors out there, vendor representatives who really, they get a little scared of that. I think it was really interesting that they pointed out that wasn't necessarily the goal, nor did it have positive outcomes for either organization to go fully repless in this model either.
Totally on the same page there. It was support.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Power Supply. And as always, the best way to listen is to download the smartphone app for iPhone or Android. But even more importantly, let's have that gentleman's agreement that Hayes brought up many months ago, many episodes ago, that if you like what you're hearing, you're enjoying what we're talking about, at least like and share the posts on LinkedIn or Facebook. And we'd really love it if you comment, because commenting is exactly what keeps this dialogue and conversation going. You don't even have to agree with everything we talk about on the shows. We're open to other opinions and thoughts on the topics. The point is to get the discussion going and getting everybody involved out there in social media. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you want to have something more private, you can send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. And as always, a heartfelt thank you from Gary, Hayes, and myself for listening to this episode of Power Supply.